What I'd like to do now is turn to the specific areas of activity that are now underway at the Foundation. We're going to hear successively about three different project areas. First is the Innovation in Medical Evidence Development and Surveillance Program, the IMEDS program that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Troy McCall, who's the leader of this effort, along with Greg Daniel, will be doing this presentation. Then we're going to be hearing about the Critical Path to Tuberculosis Drug Regimen, which will be presented by Alicia Chow and Jane Reese-Colburn from the Foundation staff. And then the Oncology Toxicology Project presented by Lori Manassian, who is working with the Foundation and also with NIH on these efforts. So three different areas of activity to go through, and we'll start out with Troy.
Thanks, Mark. Well, as I said in the introduction, my name is Troy McCall, and I am the Chief Implementation Officer at Reagan-Udall, and my responsibilities in that role are to oversee and lead the launch and the implementation of the Innovation in Medical Development, Medical Evidence Development and Surveillance Program, or as we call it, IMEDS for short. Certainly want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thank you for your interest in Reagan-Udall, and more specifically, at least as it relates to the next few minutes, in your interest in our IMEDS program. So over the last 6 months, we have made a lot of progress in the IMEDS program and getting things kicked off, and we'll go through a lot of detail today. But as you can imagine, there's a lot of information that we've tried to compile into a fairly short period of time. So we will go through all that and try to leave questions at the end of the presentation, at the end of the formal presentation. Looking around the room, I see some faces that are familiar, but frankly, many others that are not. So we're kind of going into this with the assumption that there are varying degrees of knowledge and understanding about what IMEDS is and perhaps how it relates to some of the other programs that you may have heard about, such as OMOP and mini Sentinel. So certainly for the first part of the presentation, we'll focus on exactly what IMEDS is, how it is similar to and perhaps different from some of those programs. Excuse me. Allergies are terrible, and certainly focus on what some of the benefits, some of the features and benefits are associated with IMEDS in particular. Really, though, if there's one message that we would like for everybody to walk away with after today's session, it's that IMEDS is absolutely crucial in completing the research, which will help improve the ability of the FDA, of regulated industry, and frankly the general public to continue to evaluate the safety of marketed pharmaceutical products once they have been introduced to the broader marketplace post FDA approval. Because of this research, the general public really should have a great deal of confidence that the FDA is going to have access to state-of-the-art tools and approaches that will allow them to demonstrate the continued safety of those marketed products. So, again, before we get started, let's really just, we'll spend a few moments on talking about what really is methods research and why is it so important. And to understand that, we really have to take a step back and understand that due to recent and frankly very dramatic technological advances, we now have access to an unprecedented amount of healthcare data. Specifically, data that we're receiving from electronic health records as well as health insurance claims are now routinely captured, whereas they were not before in electronic format. They're now entirely captured across the entire healthcare system within the U.S., and that certainly is beginning to expand to other parts of the world as well. So since these data were not originally intended to be used for research purposes, and as you can imagine, since these data continue to evolve in terms of how they're captured and naming conventions and so forth, we have to create methods and use methods that are not only useful today for today's types of data, but that will also be quite useful for tomorrow's types of data that are developed. So in the context of IMEDS, methods research involves the study and the development of new and innovative analytical tools to extract what was previously inaccessible knowledge from those vast amounts of healthcare data that we now have access to. These tools and knowledge moving forward are then going to be used to develop a better understanding of what data shows about what these data show about the benefits, the risks, and the outcomes of those marketed medical products. In terms of who uses this and who this is important to, there are many various stakeholders that are important in this process. But in particular, the FDA, which of course holds ultimate responsibility and authority for ensuring the safety of the American products as it relates to drugs that are consumed by the public, the FDA uses and will continue to use these methods to monitor the safety of those marketed products. Industry, of course, uses these methods to monitor the safety of the drugs and the vaccines and other products that it manufactures. And then lastly, these stakeholders, as well as other stakeholders, will ultimately use these methods that are developed not just for purposes of safety surveillance, but also for other areas of research, such as comparing the effectiveness of two different marketed medicines, as an example. So in terms of now turning our focus specifically to IMEDS, excuse me, there are three key areas that are really the cornerstones of the work that we're doing here. The first area, which is also the primary area of focus in terms of our current research, is what we call IMEDS methods. Here, and as we talked about on the previous slide, here is where we facilitate methods research to develop new and improved techniques to monitor the safety of those marketed pharmaceutical products. And then the outcome of this research is going to give access to those tools and approaches that, again, are capable of taking those large amounts of data that were previously inaccessible in terms of electronic health data, claims data, and using it to evaluate and improve public safety. So as you can probably imagine, the type of research that's done here is extraordinarily technical, and in fact is very new, thank you, and is very new to the broader research community. And the reality is that there are really only a handful of scientists in the entire world that have sufficient knowledge and that can actually make meaningful contributions to this field of research. So we want to change that, and we intend to do so through the second part of our program, which Mark kind of highlighted that will be an overarching view of Reagan-Udall as well, and that's through what we will call IMEDS education. In this program, through fellowships, we'll train scientists in exactly how to conduct this very important methods research so that we can engage and improve the methods that we have to engage in safety surveillance and eventually other areas. Lastly, we want to expand the uses of the important methods that are coming out of this, and as I've said before, and we'll say again throughout the course of this presentation, is that these methods, we believe, are not just going to be applicable to the area of safety surveillance, but we believe in other areas as well to help us better understand not just those risks, but also the benefits of marketed pharmaceutical products. And this forms kind of the third pillar of what we're doing within IMEDS, and this program is what we call IMEDS evaluation. So we recognize that a lot of you have heard about a number of different organizations and programs perhaps being associated with IMEDS. Some of those are the Foundation for the National Institutes of Health, or FNIH, certainly OMA, many Sentinel. And I think a fair question to ask is, well, why another program in IMEDS? How is what we're going to be doing in IMEDS different to or similar, or different from or similar to what's been done in these other programs? So we'll, over the course of the next few minutes, we'll try to sort that out for you. The idea of IMEDS was originally discussed really a few years ago when FDA and industry agreed that there needed to be a public-private partnership to help advance the research tools and methods and approaches for monitoring the safety of marketed medical products. So you may know that there are a few ways that this historically has been done and continues to be done. One example of that is the AIRS system, Adverse Event Reporting System, which is basically allows healthcare providers and companies to receive feedback and provide that feedback to the system where there are the possibilities of unsafe products. So since that time, there have been two other programs that have been created. One is, and these are really part of the FDA Amendments Act of 2007, or FDAA 2007, and these programs are Sentinel and OMA. So Sentinel is an initiative, as many of you probably know, that's focused in the area of conducting active medical safety surveillance on marketed products to support FDA's regulatory decisions. Stated more simply, Sentinel, through Sentinel, the FDA conducts assessments to determine the safety of marketed products. OMAP, on the other hand, is a separate initiative that really is focused on the study of how electronic healthcare data can be used to evaluate the safety of those same marketed products. So if in going through this, OMAP sounds a little bit familiar and perhaps close to what we've talked about IMEDS is going to be doing, well, there's a reason, and that's because it should. Until now, OMAP has been managed under the FNIH, but moving forward, it will be transitioned to the Reagan-Udall Foundation, which was, frankly, the original intent when it was originally established. So OMAP is already and will continue to be a very important part of the IMEDS program. So the tools that were developed within OMAP, the resources, the assets, the people, all of that is in the process, or in some cases is already transitioned to Reagan-Udall, and will certainly be a very important part of the IMEDS program moving forward. So now I want to give you an idea of some of the things that we've been working on over the course of the last few months from an operational perspective. First of all, IMEDS was effectively launched in the fourth quarter of 2012 with the first tranche of funding that was provided by the FDA. With these funds, there was a small team that was put together to launch the design phase of IMEDS. Throughout the fourth quarter of 2012 and continuing into the very early part of the second quarter of 2013, we engaged in that design phase of the IMEDS program. During that time, we created the charter. The charter, of course, lays out the mission and the vision of IMEDS, and also importantly, exactly how IMEDS will be governed moving forward. By the way, the current version of the charter is on the website. We have solicited public feedback for that and certainly would encourage you to do the same if you're so inclined. Third, during the design phase, we also created a very comprehensive transition plan for OMAP that laid out in great detail exactly how OMAP would be transitioned from FNIH to Reagan-Udall in a seamless and very efficient way, such that we would have little or no disruption in the ongoing OMAP activities. And we've done that by and large. More specifically, all the legacy OMAP staff, as well as many of the relevant contracts, have already been transitioned to Reagan-Udall. In addition to that, the virtual data lab, and the virtual data lab is really where the OMAP researchers do their work. That, along with the OMAP website, are in the process of being transitioned to Reagan-Udall, and so you should expect to see more on that in the coming days and weeks ahead. And lastly, with the formal approval earlier this month of the movement of OMAP to Reagan-Udall by the FNIH board, we do anticipate that this transition will conclude in the early part of the third quarter of this year, which, by the way, is slightly ahead of an already aggressive timeline. So at the end of the day, OMAP will be an integral part of IMEDS operating within Reagan-Udall. Many Sentinel, of course, will continue to exist and be used by the FDA to monitor the safety of marketed products. And then the third point here is really, I think, in some respects, the most important point, and that is that the IMEDS and many Sentinel programs are going to work in a very collaborative way and in a very transparent way to continue to develop robust and accurate methods for safety surveillance. So it's also very important to note that IMEDS will offer an opportunity for all stakeholders, and the number of stakeholders here are vast, certainly starting first and foremost with patients, but moving into regulated industry, foundations, government agencies, consumers, advocates, data partners, and so forth, to fund our research as well as participating in our governance activities. Again, this will be done in a very transparent way, and we'll continue to post updates on the IMEDS portion within the Reagan-Udall website. So now would like to be a little bit more specific in terms of the examples of the exact work and research that's going to be done. I think it's important to say two things here. First of all, some of this is highly technical, and I appreciate that there are varying degrees of understanding of what the program is, but we didn't want to leave the presentation today without really getting into that level of detail. The other important note here is that this in no way is intended to be a comprehensive list of the types of research and the examples of research that will be done within IMEDS, but again, just to provide examples of what we will be doing. One major focus of IMEDS research will be to improve upon the existing tools and methods, as we've talked about before, that are currently being used for safety surveillance, but at the same time creating new ones such that we are evolving those methods as the data that are coming out are also evolving. A second focus area is going to continue to be to support FDA's public health mission by establishing standardized and empirically based best practices that can be directly applied within and across the Sentinel system, which of course Sentinel is a national resource for us. The stated and acknowledged goal of all stakeholders who are associated with IMEDS is to improve public safety, and we believe that this collaborative approach will allow us to be successful in that endeavor. Another example of the IMEDS work will be to seek to develop a better framework that can be used to help FDA and other research know when observational data rule out, may or may not be appropriate to rule out false safety signals. Certainly the FDA currently uses the Sentinel system to explore safety concerns that have risen from either literature sources or from voluntary reports. But it's important to know when the Sentinel data are not appropriate to explore some of those concerns because of potential data limitations for the particular clinical situation. Lastly, IMEDS will continue to explore, evaluate, and enhance the use of common data models that support the use of the electronic healthcare data from the vast and disparate sources for the assessment of medical product safety and effectiveness. This is not only going to help the current use of the Sentinel system, of course, but it's also going to help others to implement the tools and techniques that are developed within their own data sets. So, in summary, there are a number of features and benefits that will result from the successful implementation of IMEDS. First, research findings, governance decisions, funding sources, and program activities. As we've said before, and you're going to continue to hear this as a theme throughout the course of the presentation today and our ongoing activities, it will be made available to the general public and will be made with full transparency. Later today, for example, at the formal Reagan-Udall board meeting, one of the items on the agenda is for the Reagan-Udall board to vote and select the membership for the IMEDS steering committee. That committee is going to oversee the IMEDS research agenda, We'll review potential partnerships as well as funding opportunities. And lastly, nominate the Scientific Advisory Committee in the very near future after getting the steering committee in place. We'll post an announcement about the IMEDS steering committee composition on the Reagan-Udall website as soon as those votes have taken place and those members, potential members, have accepted those appointments. Second, the IMEDS Research Laboratory is going to provide researchers with a great deal of access to numerous and diverse data sources, which of course is going to do nothing but improve the quantity and the quality of the methods research that is ongoing and will continue to be pursued. The OMOP Research Laboratory is going to be the starting point for the creation of the IMEDS Research Laboratory moving forward. Third, there are going to be a number of opportunities to collaborate with data partners throughout the distributed data network. And this is going to be important to provide IMEDS researchers and stakeholders with an even broader opportunity to develop and evaluate methods for distributed data analyses that are currently being used within the Sentinel system. Next, and again, this is another theme that you'll hear without engagement with a diverse group of researchers. So having a very inclusive research community is going to ensure that the most innovative and accurate methods are ultimately developed and used. Those participating in IMEDS research are going to be able to share their best practices across organizations and amongst themselves, which again is going to increase the overall expertise in methods research and development. Lastly, Reagan-Udall's direct association with the FDA, of course, is going to help in ensuring the continued alignment between specifically what FDA's needs are related to short and long-term public health issues and the research that is conducted within IMEDS. So in closing, we certainly do encourage active and transparent participation from the public. We would urge you to go to the Reagan-Udall website for more information on our charter. And again, we are continuing to receive public comments on that document. Also, the longer term's IMEDS research agenda is currently under development, and stay tuned again on the Reagan-Udall website to have that come out in the coming weeks. And lastly, later this year on November 5th and 6th, Reagan-Udall will proudly host the next OMOP symposium and would encourage any and all of you who wish to participate in that to please do so. So at this point, I guess I'd like to apologize for my allergies, but most importantly, thank you all for your participation, and would now turn it over if we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, thanks, Troy, and a very nice presentation. Before I open up to questions, see if anyone from the board or the staff has anything to add. Ellen?
Yeah, well, thank you, Troy, and thank you for your very hard work. As you can imagine, this has not been easy, and a lot of work went into it. I do want to acknowledge FNIH and their role and how hard they worked to make this a seamless transition. This is never easy, but it's happened, and they fully cooperated on this. This is always meant to be at Reagan-Udall, so getting this over so it wouldn't be disruptive was certainly a challenge, but it's there. I guess one a comment, I guess, and maybe you can be more specific, Troy, is now that OMOP is transferred and it is separate and then Sentinel, will it change? How does it really? I don't think it's clear to everyone who isn't inside the tent on how it really does work with Sentinel, because FDA is clearly at the table on mini Sentinel on this.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ellen, and others if you wish to contribute as well. Certainly starting out, the OMOP team, the legacy OMOP team, had a 3-year research agenda. And that research agenda is continuing through the rest of this year, the rest of 2013. In the meantime, we are working not only with our kind of continue to say legacy OMOP team, but within IMEDS, and also working closely with the FDA to ensure that The long-term research agenda is consistent, again, with meeting the short and long-term public health needs of the FDA, while also encouraging participation across other stakeholder groups, importantly, our industry representatives, to ensure that we are able to ultimately come to the table. And the agreed outcome of this is that, in particular, FDA and industry will have access to the identical methods for performing safety surveillance, but not only with the access to the same methods, but also with the same data set. So all that will be built into the long-term research agenda. And again, we're in the process of working on that now, but we do anticipate coming out with something in the coming weeks.
Any other comments up here?
Yeah, I have
Go ahead.
So I just, I wanted to just bring home how important this project is from kind of another angle. There was an article within the last couple of months that was published in, I believe, the New England Journal of Medicine that talked about another source of electronic health information, particularly regarding post-market safety of marketed products. And these researchers did a little, what we all do, a little Google searching on the internet. So we often think of electronic health data as being data that come from insurance companies and so forth that are gathered in a systematic fashion. But probably the largest source of health data right now is out there on the internet, in blogs and in other places where individual patients are entering information about products that they are using and side effects that they are realizing. And what these authors did was they searched the internet by the name of a product and a particular side effect, and they found a ton of information. And a ton of information that associated drugs, for example, with side effects that were never reported in FDA's AIR system. So the question arises, anyone can find these data, right? The question arises, what is the value of those data that are collected in this way from this huge electronic universe? And how do we make use of these data in a way that actually does advance our knowledge about the safety of marketed products? And this is what IMEDS is all about. It's not just about using health insurance data. It's about establishing ways that researchers can look at the huge amount of information that is in the electronic universe and use it in a way that helps us all as patients and consumers understand what's going on out there. So congratulations to Troy for working this out on 4 substantive slides. And I just want all of you to understand how really important this work is that the foundation is embarking on.
Thanks very much, Kay. Bill?
Perhaps it's worth adding to Kay's key remarks about the importance of this particular program, but to indicate that we're still really doing experimentation. We still don't understand how to utilize all these data, particularly when Tony talked about false signals. It's exceedingly important to know when you are missing a signal, and also, in fact, when you are finding false positives. And maybe it'll depend on the disease, it'll depend certainly on the medication or therapy. But we have to begin to do the experiments to learn how to deal with these data. There is actually very few places that can actually do this, okay? In fact, Reagan-Udall is actually the very good place to do this because it will be a honest broker, as it were. And that's our goal, is to do that. So that's number one, that we're doing experimentation. The second, of course, is that, and maybe we'll ask Tony to comment on this, this important work, of course, still requires funding. And the issue of sustainability is something that we all struggle with. And maybe you could just make a comment, and I don't know whether others would like to sort of add to that, but that's one of our challenges, actually.
Yeah, we're actually going to pass the hat here shortly. I say that jokingly, but it, as Bill points out, it's not a joke. The funding in order to pursue the longer-term research agenda is it's a daunting figure. And so at this point, historically, OMOP has been traditionally funded by industry. Funding that we have received, by and large, been by industry, but we are looking to engage other groups that will also participate from a funding perspective in the research that we're doing. We're looking at other nonprofit organizations, and I know that Jane and Mark and others have spoken to various organizations about continuing to fund the work that we're doing. And we're also looking at, in the very early stages of looking at various funding mechanisms, because ultimately what we need, of course, is a predictable and sustainable method of funding the research that's ongoing. Because it's hard to think about what might be happening as it relates to the long-term research agenda and methods that might be developed in 2016 without having that sustainable funding model well thought out and designed and actually implemented. So those activities are ongoing as we speak, and I actually would ask Mark or Jane or others if they have any follow-up to that.
All right, that's a great summary, and that is part of what the steering committee and the further work of IMEDS will undertake. It's about getting a sustainable way to address the really challenging and critical research questions that Kay and Bill described, and that IMEDS is now starting on a course to address. Okay, and you can be sure to identify who you are when you make your
Yes,
comment.
I'm Frank Weichhold. I represent myself. I am, however, working for a government agency, and I'm a physician. And the problem of the IMEDS and the goals certainly is very important, not just to the public, but I guess also government institutions. The question of sustainability, and when I look at the numbers, there's a big disconnect, and maybe you can be a little bit more specific about your outreach plans and the way you want to engage stakeholders and identify possible funding sources, because I think this is one of the key issues in order to address that.
It is a key issue. Troy may have more to add to this, but as we said, there's some funding for OMOP that has been in place and that is continuing. The intent of IMEDS is to develop a much larger and more sustainable program for research and training and the like, and a big part of the activities of the new steering committee and IMEDS as it's formulated will be to develop specific options for getting that in place and then getting it in place. It is a top priority for the board, so it's something that we want to see supported, and have been using some of our core funding to support to get off the ground. And I think there will be much more coming in terms of developing that plan.
Yeah, and one comment, and this is not necessarily in response to your question, but hearing your accent made me realize that I was a bit remiss in talking about, our view going beyond the U.S. borders for the IMEDS program and the research that's being done. Very clearly, drugs are being developed for the global marketplace, not just the U.S. marketplace. And we do have a deep appreciation for the fact that other countries are now where we are in the U.S. in terms of collecting, in some cases perhaps ahead of where we are, in terms of collecting the electronic healthcare data. And so we are going to be looking to have an international, kind of an international component, but put more specifically, our view is that IMED should be a global program. It's not a U.S. program. And so as we think about it, as we solicit feedback and participation, that certainly is one of our key goals.
Because there are just some of the side benefits of this work. Troy highlighted this in his presentation, has been in Sentinel and in OMOP and some of the activities that we're bringing together from the standpoint of methods research and better understanding data systems have been common models for how to take data from different sources, insurance claims, emerging electronic records and the like, and summarize it in a way that can be its properties can be well understood and consistently applied. That's very important for safety surveillance, for understanding patterns of adverse events, but it also can be very helpful for many other types of activities, for pulling together summary information from different data sources. So the model of distributed data analysis that is core to the safety surveillance work in the Sentinel program and the methods that we're supporting further development is also core to questions like quality of care evaluations, understanding utilization patterns, understanding potentially effectiveness of treatments in different groups of patients. So this is part of a broad agenda that we share with other research organizations, including PCORI, including groups that support quality of care work and the like. And I think you'll see some further developments of these synergies as the implementation of IMEDS continues. And a couple of other comments here. Yeah, if you don't mind going up to the front so we can hear you on the microphone.
Hi, my name's Joshua Charlin. I represent myself. Troy, I'm guessing you're probably not looking to expand the scope of IMEDS, but I'd like to make a suggestion. And that is, a few years ago, the safety reporting requirements were changed, and FDA is basically telling companies, don't do a data dump on us. We want more interpretation. We don't want to hear everything. We just want to hear the important things. And which I think is a fantastic idea, but in all the companies I work with, none of them are doing that because it's too difficult. They're still doing the data dump. The attitude is it's better safe than sorry with regard to safety reporting. So my suggestion for expanding the scope is you've talked specifically about post-approval, but do you see your ideas and your research being expandable or applicable to prior to approval?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I don't know that I necessarily have the answer to that at a detailed level. From a high level, certainly the methods that are being developed, we do believe are going to be applicable to a broad range of data sets and types of data. How they will be potentially applied to pre-approval data, I think would remain to be seen. I certainly do appreciate that there is a very strong need for something like that. But again, we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with the IMEDS program, bringing it back earlier in the clinical development continuum.
Bob Meyer from the University of Virginia. I was just curious, there are very few companies that are better at looking at big data for signals than some of the commercial companies, specifically Google, Walmart, and so on. And they also have an interest in moving towards better health outcomes for different reasons. And I'm just wondering whether, in terms of both resources for the science and resources potentially for funding, whether you're looking outside the medical community.
Yeah, that's a great point, Bob. And we actually have had those discussions because we're in agreement with you that there are very large companies that are doing some interesting work in terms of, developing new methodologies around large amounts of data. And so the short answer is yes, we are pursuing some of those.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you all very much for the feedback and input. And again, this is, as you heard, a large and still very much developing project. And we hope you will stay tuned to the information and developments in IMEDS. As you heard from Troy, there are going to be some new announcements and new developments soon, and we welcome the continued feedback.